going to be Lucy and I'm going to be Charlie Brown?
No, and I don't charge 5 cents. Good morning. It is so good to be back here at Unity Temple with each and every one of you. We've been on an adventure, and we are talking this morning about that adventure because we're all on an adventure. We're on this journey called our spiritual journey, and there's no end to this. There's no destination. It's an experience. And we know how much you all love to hear about your friend's vacation, right? So we have brought 1,000 of our favorite slides, many of them taken by David. And we
are going to be Lucy.
No. But we thought that would not be, no, that's not what we're going to do. We are talking this morning about this journey that we've been on. We went to the sea. We went on a 10-day cruise in the Baltic Sea.
On the Baltic Sea.
On the Baltic Sea, yes, we weren't in the sea. And we took along with us 12 very adventurous, fun temple travelers. And what we discovered as we were journeying through the Baltic is that these unity principles, these principles of celebrating diversity, of celebrating oneness, were how we would gather and what we would talk about, and we realized how important it was to practice these principles where we were, and that we were meeting our brothers and sisters, people we hadn't met yet, but people that were absolutely one with us. And we got to experience that as we all show up individually as our Christ Spirit and as our God nature, we also have so much more to learn. And in this time of summertime, which allows us all to be outside more, perhaps to explore more, to be more adventurous, that the reason for this type of adventure, whether you go to the park or to the Baltic, is to discover more of you. You may think that it's going to be outside of you and new people that you'll meet, but as we discovered through this journey, through these 2 weeks away, we found more of ourselves that we got to play with and be with. So we were embracing diversity as we were on this journey. We were embracing diversity of land. We visited 7 countries. We were embracing diversity in language. All of these people, English was their second language. And so we got to really see in that sense of diversity language. And finally, we were able to embrace the diversity of the legacy of each one of these countries and how enriching it was for ourselves as spiritual beings to discover more of ourselves and other people in this part of the world that many of us had never traveled.
You know, the story of the 7 countries we visited is a story that is united by a passion for freedom and for creative expression. And although there are territories that are drawn for Copenhagen and Denmark and Sweden and Norway and all of the other countries that we visited, those territories are really drawn by the artificiality of maps created by political decisions, not natural decisions that are made by humanity, but decisions made by despots and dictators and tyrants, by reformers and politicians who were at war with each other from various times throughout the history of the Baltic nations. Freedom was difficult to achieve in those countries, and we learned as we visited those countries from our historian in residence, our fellow who was named John and who spoke with a vague British accent and the kind of raspiness to his voice that evidenced there was a lot of wear and tear as he told anecdotes about this war and that battle. But when we came ashore and visited with the people of those communities, we understood the community is not defined just by the artificial territories that are drawn on a map. Community is defined by these essential values that are spiritual in nature and that unite us and make us into a community of humanity. And so those lands were really transformed by the people who reside there. And the residents of those communities of humanity share an awful lot with us, an awful lot of common experience with us, an awful lot of insight and inspiration for us.
Well, as we just sang this song, I Behold the Christ in You. And even though we were in countries that could call themselves Swedish and Finnish and Russian and Norwegian, we were able to behold that Christ in each other and in ourselves. And we were able to see, as Christ told us, to be in the world and not of the world. And to see ourselves as citizens in the world, having experiences and learning from one another. And the other idea, as we recognized and talked to people that were speaking English as their second language, I noticed that being a person that only speaks one language and doesn't do it all that well from time to time, that the people that would speak English as their second language brought us an awareness of their dedication to communicate with us. And as much as their English was a little different than our English, what we really realized was that the main language they were speaking was the language of the heart, the language of love. And that's what continued to connect us, that as we heard about these wars and the good guys and the bad guys, and then we'd arrive in these countries and there were no good guys or bad guys, there were just beautiful people, beautiful souls. And it reminded us again how we are global citizens. So this language of love, I believe, was shown to us most specifically with our Russian tour guide named, of course, Natasha.
Natasha was a woman that you would expect from a distance to be someone who wins trivia contests in Trivial Pursuit, of course, spoken in Russian. You think of tour guides of people who would get on buses and have anecdotal information about certain places in the world and point those places out to you. Not so in the case of Natasha, who was, as all tour guides in Russia, trained with a liberal arts education, a double major in art and language, with postgraduate work, required to be recertified every 3 years. She spoke 5 languages, 3 of them fluently, and she brought to her work an understanding not only of places, but of how those places were created. The Russian people are really a paradox. On the one hand, the tyranny of the czars, which led to the Russian Revolution in 1917, the oppression that is the history of that nation, is also an oppression that enabled the endowment and creation of enormous works of art. And some of that art is the architecture. The Yusinov Mansion, for example, left an enormous mark on architecture. Stairs today in construction projects in the United States are well defined by zoning codes. A certain number of steps for a certain number of feet, a certain number of inches would be the depth of each stair. Not the case when the Yusinovs and the aristocrats of Russia were creating their buildings. These buildings were created to express creativity. Women would come down the stairs looking like they were floating in their fine gowns because the stairs were constructed in anticipation of their grand entry. Efficiency was not the term that would define how these buildings would be constructed, but creativity would be defined. And so Natasha brought to us an understanding of that creativity and a passionate expression of it so that we could appreciate not just the oppression that she had lived with in her life, but the creativity that surrounded her in St. Petersburg.
And when we were going through this castle that was now a museum called the Hermitage, she kept inviting us. She kept saying, oh, I can't wait until we get to the Rembrandts, because they have some original Rembrandts. When I was young, my mother would take me through the fine art museums, and I learned a lot about the techniques of the artist. But because of this passion that Natasha brought, and that's what we were talking about with our brothers and sisters, the language of the heart, as we approached this Rembrandt, she brought it to life by this passion that was in her. Again, what I learned about fine art was sort of the technique of the artist rather than the passion through which the art was created. And we came in front of this Rembrandt, and she stopped. She says, thank heavens we're here by ourselves. She says, this is the picture of the prodigal son. Now, until I saw this picture, to me it looked like an older man and a younger man. And when we arrived at this picture, she said, you know, the father of the prodigal son was blind by the time the prodigal son came back home. And being with David, that was especially poignant. And then she says, if you look at the light that is on the face of this man as Rembrandt painted it, we see that this man does not need eyesight to love this child.